The latest ABC News Ipsos poll shows widespread approval for President Biden's top priorities. 75% approve of his handling of vaccine distribution, 72% approve of his handling of the pandemic overall, and 60% approve of how he's handling the economic recovery.
Okay, so that's that's the good news. Jonathan Lemire, you look at those three numbers. You have a president who's doing extraordinarily well with the American people and actually has a majority of support on two most important issues right now, and that is getting vaccines out there and also handling the epidemic, the pandemic, even doing pretty well with the economic recovery. So that's one side of the coin there, the positive side. We'll get to the negative in a second. But how are the Biden team feeling about how they're doing and how they need to stay one step ahead?
Well, this, of course, is their central focus. He was elected more than anything beyond just simply not being Donald Trump was to manage this crisis, our worst health crisis in a century. And they feel good about where they are, particularly after the first couple of weeks. They really ramped up vaccine manufacturing and then distribution. And that is a huge win for them right now. It can't be overstated how much better things are in terms of getting vaccines out the door into the arms of Americans. Long way to go, of course. Are there hesitant people who are hesitant to take the vaccine, need to be convinced? Yes. But right now, that is a huge strength, and they like the positive signs they're seeing from the economy. The administration feels like Biden has momentum right now because he's handling this, and they believe this can lead to his being able to push through other parts of his agenda. But they've always said this was job number one. The fight's not over, but they feel good about where they are.
And out of Palmer, the president does, as Jonathan said, his people have to feel like he has some wind at his back, especially as it pertains to the handling of the COVID crisis, and helps him push Democrats forward and maybe unite them a little more as he moves forward to whether it's infrastructure or voting rights.
Absolutely. I think basically, Joe Biden is in the strongest position he possibly could be. A lot of people on Capitol Hill, and even myself, I think, were fairly skeptical that he was going to be able to move as aggressively as they did to get COVID relief done. That's been a success. The rollout has been a success on the vaccine, as Jonathan says. The big question is going to be Wednesday, Build Back Better. Do Democrats coalesce around infrastructure, a much more complicated, probably in some cases more divisive in terms of what the priorities should be, whether it's clean jobs or other things. Can he continue that momentum? Clearly, Republicans are concerned about those poll numbers. They're not talking about COVID relief. They're talking about the border. And that's because, look at those polls, Joe Biden is in a very strong position.
So when it comes to the president's handling of the border crisis, 57% approve, 41% disapprove, excuse me. So 57% disapprove and 41% approve. The president is also underwater when it comes to his handling of gun violence. After two high-profile mass shootings, just over 42% approve, 57% disapprove.
Those are a little harder.
I want to understand those.
Yeah, those are a little harder to dig into, Reverend Al, because, of course, some on the right may think that he's doing too much when it comes to proposing new gun safety legislation. Others may think on the left that he's not doing enough. But let's talk about that border crisis. It's been a mess along the border. It's concerning when some people in the administration and also in left-wing media go, there's not a crisis at the border. Nothing to see here, move along. This is just regular migration flow when that's not what we're hearing from people on the ground. That's not what we're hearing from experts in this field. So what does the president need to do?
What we're seeing at one level, when people say this is the normal rise during the spring because the terrain across Central America is easier to travel. But there is even a surge above that. And I think the president needs to deal with the facts, be honest. I think the reason that he's gotten such high marks and high polling in the area of COVID-19 is because he's come off as a straight shooter. He must be a straight shooter about what's happening at the border. A lot of it is because people in Central and South America feel that he is a more humane president and an understanding president than his predecessor in Trump. And a lot of it, most of it, is what people are running from. We must look at the fact people do not leave their countries, risk their children, unless they're running from something they feel that is more dire. So he must analyze how he can deal with leveraging those countries to do things that would make their citizens not want to leave, and have a humane policy at the border, but at the same time stop the surge. And I do not think he needs to be Trump-like and try in any way to cover what is going on. Yes, there's a natural surge, but it's even a little beyond that, and we need to deal with that and deal with it in a square and fair way to the public.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.